Hello, everyone. In this lecture, I'll be providing you with a very, very brief introduction to different types of experimental designs. My hope is that this will be helpful with introducing you to some of the different ways that studies are structured when testing efficacy of interventions. And so for all of these, you'll see that there's some treatment introduced. But what will differ is how many groups or whether there's a pretest, a post-test, both. And you'll see what the strengths are as additional measures are added into the experimental design in order to account for other things that may be happening and that may explain the outcomes that aren't necessarily the treatment. So try to approach it from that perspective. Obviously, you're not running any experiments in this class, but it's helpful for you to understand how different designs are structured and what the benefits and limitations are of each of them. We'll start basic and get more complex. Okay, so first we have a case study. And this is the most basic. We have a treatment and then an outcome. There's no control group, there's no pretest, there's no real way of knowing whether what has happened at the outcome is because of the treatment. You're taking a client, you give them a treatment, and then afterward you are seeing what the outcomes are. So you can imagine what the limitations are here. You can't really explain what's going on, and a type of study like this is going to have virtually no internal reliability or external validity. Okay, so next, we have a two-group post-test comparison. So here we have one group that receives the treatment and then has a post-test, and then another group that does not receive a treatment and then gets a post-test. The main advantage of this design is randomization. So the post-test comparison with a randomized subjects control for the main effects of, is going to control for the main effects of history, maturation, and pretesting. So because you have that second group, you can start to control for a couple of things. But because there's no pretest here, then you can't really tell if the groups were more different than you thought they were before the treatment happened. An advantage of this is that it can be extended to include more than two groups if necessary. Okay, yeah. Okay, next we have a one group pretest post-test. So this is going to give us one group only, and they're going to receive a pretest first and then have the treatment and then have a post-test. So there is somewhat more structure. There's a single group that's under observation with careful measurement being done before and after. So it's going to have minimal internal validity. But it's really just going to control for the subject selection and the treatment, right? It has no external validity because we have no comparison group. Okay, then we have a two-group non-random selection pretest post-test. So here we have two groups. The top group is going to resemble what we just saw with the other, which is a pretest, the treatment, and then a post-test. And then the second group is our control group that's going to get the pre and post test, but no treatment, okay? The main weakness here is that it's not random, okay? Because we can't then say that the groups are different. The possibility will always exist that there's some critical difference that's not reflected in the pre-test that is contaminating your post-test data. For example, if your experimental group are volunteers, are the volunteers going to be more motivated, or are they going to have had a different background or experience that's going to affect how they interacted with the intervention and then their outcomes that maybe the control group who didn't volunteer doesn't have, right? So that's going to suggest that maybe something else is accounting for the differences you're seeing in the outcome, and you can't say with much confidence that it's your treatment. Okay, so then we have the same thing here, but now we've introduced random selection into groups so that any differences that appear in the post-test should be the result of the intervention rather than possible differences in the group to begin with. This is your classic type of experimental design and has good internal validity. The external validity of it, or the generalizability of the study, is going to be limited a little because of the effects of pre-testing. So you don't know if that pre-test, for example, is being remembered by the groups during the post-test period, and that's skewing their post-testing in some way. So that's taken into account in the Solomon 4-group design, where we introduce 2 more groups for the first time, 2 of which do not receive any pre-test. What's unique about this one is that 2 groups are getting the treatment. So you have the experimental group that's pre-tested and gets the treatment, and then you have another experimental group that's not pre-tested and gets the treatment. And so this design is going to overcome issues with external validity in the former design because the pre-testing is not going to sensitize this second unpretested experimental group to the post-test or to the intervention. And so this is going to offset that weakness and would be our strongest form of experiment. But because of the need for 4 groups and because of the need of 2 treatment groups, it can be more costly to use this design. So it's not as common as you would think. Okay, so that's it. Like I said, super, super brief introduction to some experimental designs so that you can have an idea of what the study you're reading is using. I would recommend that as you read it, you try to map it and see which design are they using and try to consider what might be the benefits or the limitations to that particular design. We'll go over this more in class if you have questions about it. It's one of those things that you may not really be interested in, so I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But if you'd like to discuss it, I'm happy to do so. Okay, thanks.